if someone was to ask you, how do you define an aggressive dog or aggression itself? How would you answer?
Oh, see, I was just thinking, I would love to hear your answer on this too. I want to hear the definition through your lens as well. So I will ask you for that too.
Okay. What would be 3 things that if you would say everyone would know them about you, they would have a really good idea who Michael Shikashio is? And it doesn't have to be dog related, but what describes you best?
Good question, because I think there's many ways I could answer that. And I focus on aggression in dogs. I run and own aggressivedog.com, and that's my passion, is helping dogs with aggression issues. So that's kind of the one thing to know about me, my background. I've been working with dogs for about 22 years now, and that started with all of the things about dog behavior, but that focused into much more of just looking at aggression in dogs. And now it's kind of turned into teaching other trainers and kind of traveling around, teaching workshops and seminars and conferences and teaching courses about helping dogs with aggression. And that's for the professional community usually. So that's the first answer. The second is that I love to travel, so it's kind of an interesting factoid about me. But as part of that travel is that I like to see things, and I like to see the sights and the sounds and like the tourist traps and stuff like that. But I also like to explore where the dogs are and get a feel for the dog culture, because I think there's a lot we can learn about not only dogs but about ourselves and about human nature and culture by how people treat animals and how they relate to dogs and how they, what do the dogs serve as a purpose in their lives. So it's another fascinating part of travel. I think one of the best things you can do is just go observe the behavior of dogs that are free roaming, or what they would kind of kindly refer to as streeties, because they really teach you a lot about behavior. The third thing about me is that I'm wildly optimistic about people. which gets me into trouble sometimes. So as part of my business, as part of how I always approach working with other professionals or colleagues or some collaborating with somebody, is that I always give them the benefit of the doubt at first. And even if I hear little rumors about the person, I never take those as truth until I actually meet the person and give them a chance to talk to them, because a lot of times it's not true. It's somebody might have a grudge or critique about a person, or maybe there's something online or social media so that's my issue, is that I'm wildly optimistic about everybody I meet until something bad happens, which can happen sometimes. But that also helps you grow and helps other people grow if you kind of keep that open mind of being optimistic about people, because it's only helped my business grow. And I wouldn't be where I am today if I was a pessimist about people. So, and it helps you build empathy too, right? You start to see the issue that's being presented to both parties, as there's a reason for that on the other party's side, right? And when we start to understand that, especially with dogs, with the work I do with aggression, fear, pain, frustration, all of those things that we should recognize first and foremost before looking at the symptoms, the barking, growling, lunging kind of behaviors, is how we help that individual dog or the person we're talking to as well. So
yeah, I think one of the things that maybe trainers have a harder time, not on purpose, but it's just harder to empathize if you don't deal with an aggressive dog or reactive dog. And what I sometimes use as a comparison during the pandemic, when parents were forced to be with their little kids at home 24 hours for the first time in their kids' life. And we know that some of these parents, and of course they love their kids above everything, right? But some of these parents, they just have been overwhelmed with the constant responsibility and having to watch out for their kids, that some of them have been diagnosed with PTSD. And you can see how that relates also with having a challenging dog. You always have to wonder, okay, who's going to come by when I go out the house? I have to be super vigilant, and I can just turn you sour, understandably. So we got to always take that into consideration too.
Absolutely.
But what I'm interested in is the dog culture in different countries. So tell me more about this. What has been like something maybe surprising or something that you carry with you when you look at dogs? Maybe something unexpected. I was able to observe some streeties in Jamaica and in Thailand, in a rural area in Thailand, which certainly is not the pet dog behavior that you expect here in the US, at least in the urban area. So what has been the fascinating part or maybe surprising part when you observe other dogs in different cultures?
I think for me, again, from the lens of looking at things when animals, people or dogs are behaving aggressively, it's why. And so one of the common misconceptions about dog behavior is like, if the dog is in an environment where they don't have all the things that humans think that the dogs need, right? So the comfy dog bed, the toys, the little cozy spot in the corner. Yes, those things are nice, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those things, but you go to different countries where they don't have those things, or they're living without any kind of contact to the comfy dog bed or the dog toys. The suspicion is that, okay, these dogs are going to be aggressive because the dogs that don't get all this stuff are going to have behavior problems, and one of them could be aggression. And then you go observe these dogs. There's a profound lack of aggression. It's the actual opposite. Is that a lot of the dogs in the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, these places where we don't see a lot of dogs on the streets, you actually see a higher prevalence, higher frequency of aggression in the pet dog population than you would in a street dog population. It's not to say aggression doesn't exist in those dogs either, but we certainly see a much more intense presentations of aggression in a lot of pet dogs, because that wouldn't work for a lot of street dogs. They wouldn't survive long. So it's just really, really fascinating to see that what we view as our human culture in a lot of places in the world. We think we know what dogs need, but we actually don't. And the way to tell is seeing how the dogs thrive from a behavior standpoint. Now, of course, those dogs are lacking veterinary care in many of those places. But from a health standpoint, sure, they could use better quality of life there. But from a mental enrichment and behavioral standpoint, they are some of the wealthiest dogs. You see them because they have freedom. They have freedom of movement. They know how to navigate the world. They know how to provide their own safety. So all these things that we sometimes take away from the dogs in our care, they have plenty of. So that was one of the big takeaways. And now that I've been to so many different countries, that I've really started to see that, where the more freedom the dogs have, the less likely you're going to see aggression.
Yeah, that's very interesting. But on the other hand, also very hard to change when you're living in an apartment building in New York City, right? So we can change that there is not enough space for that particular dog that, might be prone to maybe be neurotic and more likely to be aggressive. We can change the space. But then we maybe focus too much on, here's this toy, and here's another toy, and here's another toy, and here's this bed, and here's all the things that we might think, okay, now you should be happy. Now there's no reason for you to be aggressive. So to translate that from the more freedom they have, the less likely that they're aggressive, to a situation in New York City in an apartment, what is the mindset shift that then this person or this owner should have?
Yeah, I think there's some nuances to that, right? Because it depends also what kind of dog we have. So we could use a couple of different breed examples. We might have something like a toy breed, or dogs that have been selected for just the typical lap dog scenario. So going back many years, generations, so bred for nobility to just hang out on somebody's lap, and that was kind of their day. So there's that type of dog. That's the kind of dog that's going to be well suited for an apartment typically. And we can dive into the whole genetics conversation as well, but typically, so I'm not saying all of those dogs, but typically we're going to see that. Now, if you take another dog that has used to large ranges of movement, meaning like a Rhodesian Ridgeback or a livestock guardian dog, and we take that dog and put it in an apartment in Manhattan, we're not going to often meet the dog's needs that, again, humans have selected for and bred for that particular characteristic, and suddenly we want something different. And kind of is strange when you think about it, because it's like humans that have developed different vehicles for different purposes over the years. We don't think twice when we're like, I don't need a big dump truck for my commute in Manhattan, right? But that's what you're doing. It's like, okay, I'm going to go out and get a big 18-wheeler, to go down the street to the store. It wouldn't make sense. So it's kind of the same thing when we have a livestock guarding dog, a mastiff in an apartment. So we have to get creative with meeting those dogs' needs and also be realistic. So meeting the dog's needs is allowing for space. We can take them somewhere where they can have that freedom of movement, be allowed to engage their olfactory senses, be able to explore, be able to sniff, and perhaps even engage in some of the behaviors that they've been selected for. Obviously not biting and guarding livestock, but we might be able to do things that are similar to that. We might allow some barking and alerting, say, oh, you did see something. Good job. You're doing what you're selected for. We control it. We don't allow, obviously, to escalate, but that can meet the dog's needs, which then when they go back to their apartment, they're like, okay, got my job done for today. Feeling a little better, been a little bit enriched, satisfied. And, so I think there's a lot of layers to that conversation that we could dive deeper into.
Yeah. So it starts with the research, right, on the breed. And it does make sense because genetics, they don't change as much as our environments change, especially now in the 21st century. Like even us humans, we don't, our genetics don't change. We don't keep up with all the overwhelm, and neither do dogs. And now they're being found in very different environments that they weren't selected for, just because in this tiny little time frame we changed. Oh, no, we don't need you for work anymore, and I want to cuddle with you. An extreme case at home, right?
Yeah, and culturally, we're a fashionable society in a lot of senses. We go for things by the look first, and not necessarily the ability or the purpose of it first. And that's what gets us in trouble. So we go out and get a dog because it's white and fluffy and large and cuddly looking, but it's a Maremma or a Great Pyrenees that we're taking again back to our apartment. Yeah. So things to consider. Or we see it in a Disney movie or something in a TV show. And we're like, ooh, that dog looks great and seems really smart and intelligent, but we don't recognize that. Well, then that particular characteristic, we're going to have to satisfy that need. So yeah, it's I think I would love to, if we could change things to get people thinking about the health and the behavior and the needs of the dog, and then look at the looks. Like, oh, lucky here, I got a good looking this kind of dog that's fitting my lifestyle, right?
I got lucky. This is actually a good looking dog and fits into my lifestyle. Yeah. And that works like in both ways in terms of, or in any kind of way in terms of the breed and what that dog symbolizes for that person in terms of the looks, and then what you actually get. So let's dive a little bit more into the whole breed and genetics concept or problem, or whatever we want to call it. In Germany, we don't have controlled breeding for bully breeds. In the UK, large bully breeds are being banned now. There's been huge movements for pit lives matter, right? And misconceptions, more banning, judgment for, why do you have a dog like this? But also saying it's the sweetest dog I've ever had. What is the truth behind these conversations or discussions? Where do we have to be more careful?
All of these discussions, what's happening is the missing critical thought at the high levels. That the people that are making these decisions aren't talking to the people that know most about this, the data and the science behind it, genetics and statistics and dog bites and really what works and what doesn't. All they would have to do is look across the pond and see what's worked for BSL or breed specific legislation, and that it doesn't work here in the United States, and it's been tried and it just doesn't work. It doesn't show any decrease in dog bites. In fact, in some places that's actually seen an increase in the number of dog bites. So we also have to consider, yes, genetics do matter. Sometimes I would be completely irresponsible to say, okay, a large Presa Canario is going to be safer than a Pomeranian, right? Because of the size alone, but also what we've selected for, right? So what if it wasn't biting that was the problem? What if we had dogs that we didn't, suddenly hurting things was illegal, right? Or retrieving something, grabbing your socks, bringing them to you. Suddenly we didn't want that. We need to ban all dogs that bring socks to you. For whatever silly reason, but that's just being a silly example, but it's a true example of saying, okay, genetics do matter. So we might have to look at, okay, border collies that are hurting the kids around the backyard, or the Labradors or golden retrievers that are bringing socks to you all the time, more so the golden retrievers. But we're going to have to think about that. So I think there's that nuance where we can't say, okay, all bully breeds are going to be totally fine. And we'll get to that part of the conversation in just a second. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to note that some of these dogs, if it's a true pit bull, American pit bull terrier, if we're going to identify the breed correctly, then there's potential for the bite style to be bite and hold and shake, versus another type of dog like a border collie that's going to stop at that predatory motor pattern of bite and not hold and shake and try to really take down the victim. And usually it's directed towards other dogs if we're looking at the breed's specific characteristics and the heritability of it. But it's not all dogs. In fact, it's actually very few of those dogs that can do that behavior well. It's really hard to actually get good, what we're looking for, that behavior, that not that it's good that the dog's biting other dogs, but what we're selecting for is actually difficult to get. But at the same time, we have to recognize that it could be there. So I understand that conversation. The problem, though, is the misidentification of breeds. So imagine for especially with from what I understand of the XL bully breed ban, they're identifying certain measurements and of size of the dog and things like that. So imagine if we did the same thing. Suddenly we're banning all border collies, right? Let's just use that dog for example. Okay, it's all dogs with the medium coats, some merle, with certain set of ears and a tail that's fluffy or something like that. Can you imagine? That would characterize a whole ton of other dogs. We'd be looking at Cocker Spaniels, maybe, a lot of other dogs that fit that same characteristic. That's the problem. Because then what if we just started taking dogs that we are from the shelter that kind of look like border collies? A lot of people are like, oh, that's a border collie mix, or there's probably some border collie in there. Or that dog looks like it's got a pointy nose, probably border collie. And then if you look at the actual DNA, or if you actually tested for that dog, you see maybe sometimes no border collie at all. In fact, that would happen a lot because breed misidentification happens all the time. Even if you were to ask a room full of professionals that have been around breeds and dogs, collectively for thousands of years, you're still going to have a lot of error in that identification. That's where the problem lies in these breed-specific bans, especially something that's called an XL bully breed. Mm-hmm. What is that? That's not even a breed, and so that it leaves it up to a lot of interpretation. That's where the problem with those kind of bans come into place. So there's a lot of nuances to it, and I think critical thought needs to be brought into that discussion. But unfortunately, with mass hysteria responses, you have these things that get passed very quickly or shoved through the pipeline to appease the masses that are often brought on by hysteria. So
yeah, and I also think in terms of the discussion and then the argument where people say I have a pit and it's the sweetest guy in this world, being aggressive and being sweet, they're not mutually exclusive. It really depends on the situation and, is the dog pushed in a certain way? What's the trigger? What's the experience? And maybe this all comes also back down to how do we define aggression, Because right. As a dog, being a predator, every dog can be aggressive and every dog can bite. Like you said, how far do they go? What strength do they bring into the biting itself? I think there are prevalences for certain breeds, like we see in potentially bully breeds, but also in German Shepherds. No one would ever think to ban a German Shepherd because all we love is German Shepherds. They're the heroes, right? But then we have our pits who are the ones that are mostly in rescues, and they are the problem. So I think we just look at this we're trying to find some categorization by breed and looks. If we can't ban an entire breed, we just go by looks and doing the extra large ones, and totally more and more miss the point of where it all starts. And yes, maybe it's the education for what kind of dog do you adopt or get, the breeding itself instead of banning the breeding, more control in breeding. basically really looking into the temperament that we're getting. And I think there's always going to be dog bites. There's always going to be dog bites, as sad as it is. And there's always going to be someone or an animal who dies because a dog has bitten or got aggressive. That's just what it is. And I don't think we're going to ever change that. We're just probably going to make it worse by hoping that we're going to fix this altogether, rather than actually putting more, shaping it more in the direction for us to make it more measurable and manageable.
Yeah, and that's the issue too, is the hysteria around it. I mean, it sells a good newspaper article to talk about a dog that bites because they have pointy teeth. It's almost like a shark bite, right?
Yeah.
Shark bites somebody in the water. There's all these newspaper articles, the media takes on like, oh my gosh, don't go swimming now, and all these bans and like ban swimming at the beach now because there could be a shark. And if you look statistically, there's just not a lot of shark bites that happen. It's really, really difficult to get bitten by a shark. I mean, you have a better chance of getting into a lot of other things in your life, winning the lottery, for example. So when you look at dogs, though, now we can have the argument, okay, Mike, that sounds great, but there's hardly any sharks. You're not going to experience any sharks, but we're seeing dogs all the time. But that's exactly it. Is that dogs are so good about not biting us. If you look at statistically the number of dogs on the planet versus the number of humans versus other animals that could bite and other things that kill us, right, or that injure us in our lives, dogs are really, really good about not injuring us, not biting us, not doing anything to cause us harm. Because statistically, balloons and slippers cause more deaths every year than dogs. There's
really,
yeah. What's the deadliest animal on the planet? Mosquitoes. I mean, there's so many cows. Cows kill more people every year than dogs do. So it's just, I think there's a lot of hysteria around it. That's unfortunately, dogs get the brunt of it, though, because we have these breed bans and all these other laws and restrictions that end up making it worse, especially the restrictions on dogs' movements and leash laws and don't go here, don't go there. Dogs are not allowed here and there, which makes it worse and worse and worse. Yeah. And that's the difference, actually, over when I was just in Germany and France, and I saw just how much public access the dogs have versus the U.S.
Everywhere.
Yeah. And I will say, and again, I know there's aggression cases in those countries, but I did not see anything remotely as near as like the amount of sort of nervousness and anxiety and sort of hypervigilance of a lot of the dogs here in the U.S.
Yeah.
I was so impressed, especially in Berlin. There was just so many lovely dogs, and they're out in the restaurants, and I was just like, this is wonderful.
And they're walking through the city without leash. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yes, yeah,
and they walk by other people, and they walk by other dogs, and they're very neutral, very content with who they are. And there have been comparisons, and you probably read this too, right, with dogs of homeless people to a certain extent. They get their exercise in because they and don't want to glorify being homeless here, but for the dog itself, right, it's like exposed and just being content, and like that's part of the situation. And in Germany, I grew up in Germany, and I was never aware that this is so special because this is all I knew, and we don't pay attention to things that you grow up with. And I came to the US, and it's like, wow, dog culture is similar but different. Yeah. And when I travel back home, especially Berlin, and this might also be with the temperament of us Germans, being German partly, you do you, and I don't even go up and ask. I would never have the idea to ask, can I pet your dog, or start talking to your dog, right? It kind of is a perfect bubble of socialization because the dog is exposed to everything without the pressure of having to interact or having to have an opinion about something, because it's just there.
Definitely. I think culture really helps to shape the dog's behavior as well, and what the expectations people have, with other people when they're approaching their dog. It's actually beautiful to see in some countries. It's like dogs are given their space, nobody's making a big deal about it. It's just lovely to see.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that doesn't happen in the US.
Yeah, well, maybe we have to set up a socialization camp in some of these countries. Everyone comes to Germany for a little bit for socialization their dog, and then they come go back. But let's switch to the definition of aggression, because I think this is a very beautiful example where, understanding a little bit more the neurobiology of this can help widen how we look at aggressive dogs, because it is not just when there's a bite. Aggression is so much more, really. So from your experience or from your perspective, if someone was to ask you, how do you define an aggressive dog or aggression itself, how would you answer?
Oh, see, I was just thinking, I would love to hear your answer on this too. I want to hear the definition through your lens as well. So I will ask you for that too.
Okay.
So I define it as it's behavior. So I'm more of a behaviorist lens, but it's behavior. So all animals, so humans included, have the ability to display aggression or use aggression for survival, to remove a threat and to feel safe. That's the function of aggression. So for me, it's just behavior. So the behaviors like barking, lunging, growling, snarling, snapping, and biting, used to increase distance from or eliminate a threatening or provocative stimulus. So basically that boils down to, I just need this thing to go away. I need it to move away. I need it to get away, or I need to actually eliminate the threat to feel safe, because it's a threat to me, to my resources, to my people, to my property, whatever it is the dog considers of value, including themselves. They're going to use that to protect themselves. So it's quite simply it. And when we look at that, then we can understand that there's no need to really think of it as a bad thing, because aggression is often thought as like a bad word or bad label. Don't do that. But it's a normal behavior. That's all it is. It's behavior, and we're all capable of it. It's just our societies place norms and rules and laws against seeing that. And of course, we don't like it when a dog sinks their teeth into our arm, right? But when we understand it's normal behavior, then we have to address the underlying reason for it. And if we look at it that way, that's the way we can help dogs. If we start labeling it as a bad or evil behavior, it could change our tactics and how we change that behavior. So very crucial to make sure we understand it's normal. It's normal.
I definitely had also literally the sentence in my mind. It's normal, period. It's nature, really. And like you said, I think just looking at aggression as something that is wrong or shouldn't be there already sets you off to the wrong path. And I remember when I talked to Dr. Julia Espinosa, she's the postdoc at Harvard doing one of the aggression projects. We met at a conference and we talked about it, and I told her, let's change how people see aggression. Let's kind of not come up with a new definition, but just change the underlying mindset towards aggression, because it's just nature. And it's, like I said, it's behavior. It's a process, that has obviously the behavior attached to it that we see as an endpoint to a sequence of things. But there's also a beginning. And I think that's where it really gets interesting, because where the beginning is very subtle and is different for each dog, and potentially on average a dog breed. But that this could be any kind of daily incidents that the dog experiences. And eventually all this process, right, that kind of pushes a dog more towards being aggressive, having all these behaviors exposed, is kind of like adding pressure to the system based on what the dog experiences on a day-to-day basis, on a monthly basis, over the years, until a certain threshold is reached. And that can be very, very quickly for certain triggers, right, if you really feel unsafe. But it also can be chronic stress that pushes more and more and more until, like a firework, something sets off. And then you see the behavior that we don't want to see. And that's the part where then owners say, my dog has never done something like this before, or never thought my dog's going to bite my child or whatnot. And what's interesting is that we do know that there's there is a certain brain area, but also circuitry, meaning neurons, connections that ultimately send to the brain bite or behave aggressively, have many, many inputs, right? One is the amygdala, which is fear related. Is this a threat or not? As a threat detector. Then we have also proactive aggression versus a defensive aggression, and they have different inputs. And I'm not the biggest fan of labeling all the different types of aggression that we have.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just really depending on the context, but the context determines how much pressure can that dog take. Just like with us humans, right? It's very, very similar because the genetic of aggression hasn't really changed. It's not that different between species. Yes, there are a lot of nuances that are different, but we see a certain type of aggression in fruit flies and chimpanzees and dogs and humans. And it's all about the pressure on the system, on the brain, saying, okay, you can't take this anymore. And then the outcome is aggression, which is the most normal thing. And it would be weird if it wouldn't be aggression to defend yourself, to guarantee survival, right? Because again, genetics still all about survival. I think ultimately then, in terms of what is the root cause and how can we address that, I come in from a stress level and saying this is a lifestyle, and some of things you can really change and have a better output, get the dog less reactive or aggressive. And some of this becomes management when it comes to, like we said, no way for you to meet this dog's need on a daily basis. You got to manage more or whatnot. But what I would like for people to know, or for dog owners to know, is when your dog is reacting a certain way in a certain situation, to be able to differentiate, yeah, of course you're reacting this way in that moment. Let me help you, feel better about the situation, or let me help you not be in that situation again, versus, oh my God, this is horrible. I'm a failure. My dog is bad. I feel embarrassed. Something really went wrong. And I think if you can change that, how we look at it, and then actually work with the aggression from a neutral perspective, I think we can actually set up like a better process for rehabilitating, or not even rehabilitating, but reshaping behavior so it fits better into the lifestyle.
Yeah, I could go down a whole rabbit hole with you on this. Like, we could pick each other's brains.
Yeah,
figuratively on what's happening inside the brain too. It's fascinating to me, and it's all stuff I've just been learning about from folks like you and over the years, and because there's a lot of nuances to that discussion as well. It's fascinating, and seeing the research on lower serotonin levels in dogs that are more likely to display aggression, and the impacts of the stressors you were talking about, and just that's why I love having these conversations, bringing both communities together. Some trainers are like, don't get too much into the science, and it's true, you don't want to overwhelm some clients, but I do think it helps clients empathize when they start to learn about things that the dog can't necessarily control, just like humans can't necessarily control in some ways, and how much it can impact behavior. And you could use an analogy, like, you ever have to go to the bathroom really bad? Like, you have to go, like, you just drank a lot, so there's a lot of fluid in your body and you have to expel it. And so they can start to understand a little bit that we don't have control over all the functions, and neither does a dog, and they're going to be experiencing an overload of certain things happening, and that's going to impact them physiologically, which then impacts their behavior. I think that's very helpful because sometimes people latch onto it's like almost like a robot. You're just flipping switches. The dog should do this, or sit, or down, or come here, or whatever, like a robot, without thinking about those physiological, neurological mechanisms in play. So from an empathy standpoint, I think it's helpful as well.
Yeah.